North America is home to the most sophisticated standard in electronic trading worldwide. London may well be the world's largest financial market centre and the generator of all of the Tier 1 bank liquidity, but America is the number one in terms of long-term commodities traders, equities and futures, and prime of prime brokerages. Today, here we are in Waltham, Massachusetts, at Advanced Markets and Fortex's head office. And we're going to take a look at some very important issues that affect the institutional trading sector today. We join Natalia Hunik, Global Head of Sales, here at the company's Waltham headquarters in Massachusetts.
Europe has never really been, mainland Europe, never really been an area where there's been that much financial markets infrastructure or particularly a electronically driven economy. It's a very old-fashioned place. The only place which is quite the contrast to that is London, which is really the centre for the world for infrastructural development, Tier 1 banks, the electronic financial marketplace, and all the talent that serves it is very highly sophisticated, concentrated in London. The rest of Europe is not so relevant. However, MiFID, Markets in Financial Infrastructure Directive, the second version has just come out, very ambiguous, but it does concern London, it does concern retail brokers in Cyprus that are part of the EU, and I've got some very strong opinions on what I think is going to happen with all of these things. But in terms of, that's on the retail side, but on the institutional side, the B2B side, the provision of best execution going from the retail brokerage through the relationships with prime of prime brokerages into the banks or into their own dealing desks is a massive moot point at the moment. Not that many people seem to know what to do with it, actually.
Yeah, so MiFID II is a cornerstone regulation. It was designed after the 2008 financial crisis, and
Right.
it's supposed to address the issues of transparency in the financial markets. So when we're speaking about the best execution, I know it's not very specific in the actual regulation itself, and I believe all the national regulators, need to take steps to address that ambiguity, and give the licensees in their jurisdictions some precise instructions on how to handle it. However, the best execution clause just expands the definition of the best execution itself beyond just the parameter of the cost. So you shouldn't be, as a brokerage, as a retail brokerage, you shouldn't just be working with a liquidity provider because it's cheap.
That's for sure.
This is fair. So you have to look at the components, at the other criteria, such as the speed, execution, the quality of the execution, fills. You also have to, it's very specific about the fact that you have to undertake a due diligence on the counterparties that you work with. And look beyond just the offer in itself. Look at the company, at the market experience, at all other things that, you have to evaluate when you start working with a liquidity provider. So I believe that perhaps in the current market, this clause has been ignored oftentimes, and we know that in some areas, like in Cyprus, for example, there were several issues with some liquidity providers where people were just taking retail brokerages, were just taking the liquidity just on the sole basis, just on the sole basis of the cost. However, it didn't deliver the best execution to their customers. So what the retail brokerages should be taken care of is ultimately is their end customers. So they need to do their job on selecting the liquidity providers that deliver that best execution to their customers. And I believe in, the European regulation says you can either have 5 liquidity providers or 1. You just need to make sure that execution is consistent, and it's the fill ratios are good, that the price is good. If you do the proper evaluation of your liquidity provider, you could probably achieve that.
You could, but there's another can of worms in there, exactly as you've highlighted. And this is, again, very important, because it's important that we actually explain this to many companies, is that you can have up to 5 liquidity providers.
Right.
That's okay. Doesn't have to be that. But there are many retail brokerages with relationships with many prime of primes and brokerages that are not prime of prime but are actually selling liquidity from their own dealing desk as a retail fee, but on a B2B basis. However, best execution covers this. What it says is that, and nobody's really had this explained to them yet, but it says that if you're a retail brokerage and you have got a few different relationships,
Right.
and you pass a trade through and you work out which of these is going to execute it at that specific time at the correct price, and you do it, and it was good for the customer. If you get an inspection and they go to the clearing and they look at the trade clearing and pull the report, because obviously now under MiFID you have to report everything, and they have to retain it on record. They will take the trade, the ID, the identifier of the trade off the back end of the system, and they'll look at the price and they'll say, okay, yes, that's fine. However, what's your relationship like with that Prime Brokerage?
Right. And
this is the thing: if you've got a very favourable terms from one particular Prime Brokerage, and it was still an okay price, it was nothing wrong with the trade execution, and the customer didn't complain or so forth, but it could have gone to this Prime Brokerage, Prime Brokerage, and they were charging less for it. Then the inspectors, the regulatory inspectors, might say, well, you're supposed to be acting in everybody's best interests, and therefore you should process where you pay less, and therefore the customer pays less commission on their trades.
Right.
That's possible. They might start looking at that.
Yes, absolutely. They might. I think the industry at this moment is still vastly ignorant about
Very
the
much
MiFID
so.
II.
It's so ambiguous that there's
Right. So I think everyone is kind of probably looking for more clarity, but that is a good point. Yes, absolutely. The customer's interests have to be kept in mind when the brokers are executing transactions. And moreover, I don't think the customers themselves are realizing the power that they have now, because MiFID is actually very specific about the fact that the customers could demand transparency. They could come to the brokerage and ask, give me details on my trade. I want to know who executed, who was the counterparty to this trade.
Yes.
And, what's the commission looking like? What is your cost structure looking like? Was the trade executed in one fill, or were there multiple legs? All of those details have to be, and was there an IB attached to my account? All of those details have to be provided by the retail brokerage within the specified time period.
They do, and I think that's exactly as you describe it, is exactly where we have arrived to now on the retail side. That is how astute most of the retail traders in good quality jurisdictions are. They will ask those questions, even if they don't necessarily know. The MiFID, like a lot of regulation, the MiFID infrastructure directive on that aspect is reactive. Because that's where the traders are. That's what the European government have stipulated. It's not like in China or America, where they will actually build the framework and then make it all public information, and everyone knows where they are with it. In Europe, it's reactive. So, and they're not law enforcement agencies like they are here in America. So, for example, that's where the customer is, but the customer will, even now, where you have this knowledge, great knowledge has been built up over the last 30 years of retail FX existing. It's not got to the point where that customer might say, well, I want to now see where you might have executed my trades to. Had that particular, I want to see your structure between the B2B relationship between you and your providers, because if there's another one that you could have gone to, then you're not giving me the best execution. And I don't think we're there yet with that. The knowledge isn't quite there yet. They understand exactly as you say that they will ask, where was it cleared? Was there an IB being paid commission here, where the spread has been increased to cover the IB costs? Where's the where's the actual what's your commission structure like internally with your liquidity provider? But I don't think they realise that the broker has the chance to shop around for liquidity providers either. I think they see it as a single component.
But it still provides a lot more transparency to the retail traders. Perhaps the retail trader still wouldn't have full visibility into how the brokerage operates or what were the choices of the liquidity, right? But post-execution, they can demand the report, and it would gain that access to the data that previously has been blank for them.
Yes.
So they could just
well, that's right. They
really
could just go to
gain
the system and get it off the
the
system. That's
right.
Exactly.
They'll gain better understanding of the business model that the broker is actually deploying versus what is being advertised. And there comes this other subject of, well, a lot of times in the facts we see that what is being advertised is not necessarily what's being implemented, right? So there's a big gap in between.
Marketing over substance.
Exactly. So there's been a lot of buzzwords thrown around like STP and ECN
Yes.
and things like that. And the retail public buys the marketed message but doesn't really know what's behind it. They believe that that is the model that is being deployed, but in fact it might not be. So having that ability to request more transparency and request a report is pretty critical.
It's critical, and actually it addresses another thing, STP.
Right.
What exactly is that? It could be that before MiFID II came in, straight through processing, sending the brokerage sending its trade to its provider would be compliant, and the regulators themselves were relatively ignorant to, not here in America, but in Europe they were relatively ignorant to this. As long as no inspector, no compliance manager would ever question it if they could demonstrate the trade was going to the provider.
Right.
But the provider then internalises the trade on a B book on their own dealing desk with their other retail customers because they're not a prime of prime. They have no liquidity arrangement in place. It's just another retail broker with a SISAC license that happens to be selling a dedicated price feed, which it makes up itself, and then adds the IB commission and everything to it to another retail broker. Right. That's not best execution. But now, straight through processing, even if a retail client thinks, okay, yes, they're sending it to to their liquidity provider, which isn't a real one, they can see that on the reports now.
Right. So I think it probably has a way to go, but I would imagine that the European regulators would undertake more scrutiny in who are those liquidity providers, and that's part, again, going back to the best execution, that you shouldn't be just taking any liquidity provider that doesn't have license, has no operating experience, has no business experience. You shouldn't be doing that, because you should keep your customers' interest in mind at all times. So when you are shopping around for appropriate counterparty, you need to pick the one that will deliver the best execution and also has experience in doing that and credibility.
That's right.
So that just goes back to the same very points where we started our discussion.
It does, and I think that in Cyprus, if you look at the 155 current retail forex brokerages that exist in Cyprus, they range from massive ones like FX Pro, with FCA licenses and their own internal departments for pretty much everything and hundreds of staff, to 4 desks with 3 or 4 marketing people, and all the customers are being onboarded offshore to an offshore, just given completely different trading terms that are not compliant under MiFID, and they have no liquidity provider. So I think what's going to happen is one of 2 things. Either they will realise that they've got to keep a Western base, or they will realise that most of their client bases are in places like Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, certain parts of the Middle East where it doesn't come under the remit of the European rulings, and they'll just renounce their SISAC license and just concentrate on IB business in Asia. Right. That could happen.
Absolutely possible scenario.
And the complete misnomer here is that if they think that they can do that without choosing a good liquidity provider, because they can just go there and internalise the trades and just go back to how it was 15 years ago, where these unlicensed and unregulated companies with an off-the-shelf platform could just do whatever they like. No, because the IB networks in those regions will demand they have a high-quality prime on the end of it. Right. So they've got a problem. They either renounce their SISAC license and go offshore and then carry on raking in deposits from IBs, from large IB networks, and giving very big leverage and doing huge IB commissions, and then risk not being able to get a good prime of prime relationship because there's no licensing, it doesn't fit, never go through compliance. Or they keep their SISAC license, spend a bit of extra to become compliant and not do this offshore stuff, and go for a good quality liquidity provider to satisfy those Asian clients or African clients.
Both are plausible scenarios, but I think the second one is more probable, because the first one where they just go completely offshore, it's a setback, and
it's a complete setback.
Complete setbacks to like a decade ago.
That's right.
But of course, most of the brokerages do maintain multiple licenses in various jurisdictions, and that's a regulatory hedge, and we understand why they're doing it. And as you already mentioned, I think the customers and the customer understanding of the financial markets have evolved, and in areas like Southeast Asia and China, customers do care about the license that the broker holds, and their reputation and credibility. Perhaps not all of them, but I would think that most of them do.
That's for sure.
And so operating under offshore license wouldn't probably do any good for
they would
you
never get any business.
For reputation and credibility of the retail brokerage. So
that's right.
they probably want to keep the European license. However, yes, it is going to be quite a bit of work on the compliance side to comply with the European regulations.
I think it's I've seen a few of them get rid of it and go to Vanuatu and things like that, but they can pretty much only rely on having a very small, low deposit customer base that's going to look for a B-book firm. That again is a setback to years ago. Good ones, yes, they might not have any customers in Europe, so they might question, why do I need to go through all this expense and compliance and reporting systems and getting regulatory technology companies to come here and implement systems for me when I don't have European customers? But it's impossible to get good B2B relationships in Southeast Asia or Canada or anywhere without a proper jurisdiction. And obviously, okay, SISEC might be a fringe society, but it's an immediate passport into FCA. It comes under exactly the same remit under MiFID as FCA in London. So without that, yes, you reduce your costs, but you'll end up with no liquidity provider and pretty much no client base. So it's just not worth it.
So it is pretty critical to maintain the European license for all the brokerages.
That's right. Yeah. So that's that. And I think that, again, the days of having a retail feed from another broker that's next door to them is pretty much time to redress that and go looking for proper liquidity providers.
I believe so. I believe so. And MiFID II is certainly demanding retail brokerages to introduce the appropriate structure on the liquidity side.
Yeah, absolutely it is.